As a parent, I think it's really important that we don't really leave our kids with too many questions about who we are, how we think, everything like that. I think it's important, as we were talking about earlier, to pass on our values, pass on our beliefs, and all those things that are important to us.
Because an educator will spend time walking beside you and encouraging you and giving you accountability for the goals you want to accomplish once you know what they are. An entertainer will sell you a product and move to the next one. If they don't have ways to educate you, that's entertainment.
The producer paradigm, which is you're in this world to produce more. You are here to give. You are here to add value. You are here to create value, because we understand that our human life value is the source and creator of our property value, and income is the byproduct of the value that we create. Where consumers are more, let me push off the responsibility. Let me just take. That's all I'm here for, is to buy, consume, take.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Legends podcast with your hosts, Nate, Brandon, and Brock. Remember, our insights are not direct financial advice, so consult with your financial team before making any decisions based on the topics discussed in this show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Cash Flow Legends. I'm here with my two dudes, Nate and Brock, as usual. Our goal here today, as always, is to bring a ton of value, ask a lot of really good questions, and really get you, the listener or the viewer, thinking about how you think. It has been the theme of many conversations the last couple of weeks for me, guys. The better questions we ask, the more people begin to really think about what they're doing and why. I'm beginning to realize, guys, that the better questions that I ask people about their journey, you get a lot of clarity that they don't get asked these questions very often. Not normal. It's actually a little awkward sometimes for people, or uncomfortable. We do it every day, so it doesn't bother us. It's a kind of a part of our day. But for most people, they're kind of taken aback. So you kind of got to frame it out and go, hey, I'm going to ask you some questions. They're not loaded questions. I really want to know what you think about it. And so today's one of those topics. And what I really love about the topic today is we're going to get a couple of different perspectives, but it's about fatherhood. It's about the future for our children or future children, if we're going to have children like Brock. And it's really crafting a legacy beyond wealth. And I think that's an important key to touch on, is crafting a legacy beyond wealth. And let's break that down. So when you guys hear that, just as a framework of the conversation today, what kind of jumps out at you from where you are right now, your conversations, your daily kind of interactions, your own personal journey?
I would say for me, it's kind of unique because I'm not the father figure to somebody on the wealth building journey, but I do have a father that has helped me in this walk of it. As you were talking, I was having flashbacks of, kind of how and when our conversation started around wealth, how it works, why it works, what's going on, and how to produce in this world as a producer rather than a consumer. So I'm excited for this conversation.
I like it. Nate?
Yeah, I think about what Scott Donald said in a talk where he said it's more important to leave your kids a heritage, not necessarily an inheritance. There's so much built around heritage when it comes to our values being passed on to our kids, our faith being passed on to our kids, how we really our worldview, how we view the world, how we think about business, how we think about relationships, like all of those things are just extremely valuable, and you can't really put a dollar amount. It's one of those things that what does Mastercard call it? Priceless. It's one of those priceless things that when you have the ability to bring things that are really important to you and pass those down to someone else, encourage them through that process of learning and growing so that they can continue on to the next generation. That's just another level of legacy.
All right. So we'll start from a high level and we'll drill down. That'll be the goal today, because I want there to be some practical things that, Brock, you've experienced from how your parents have raised you and y'all's relationship. I'll share some of mine from my parents, because we still are on this journey together, which is cool. And they can do the same. And then we can also talk about our children and how we're doing that now, and just kind of give some practical conversation. So from a high level, Brock, what are some things that you mentioned earlier? You kind of flash back to when your dad started talking about these things. And you said something that probably most people have never heard before. I know I hadn't until I started interacting with your dad and a lot of our conversations about being a producer instead of a consumer. You want to touch on that a little bit and when you remember that beginning and kind of how that went as far as timelines, maybe your ages or whatever?
Yeah. So the exact moment was it was in junior year of high school when I took my first Dave Ramsey class. And I still remember the teacher, James Wilhoit. He's the UT kicker who kicked that field goal against Florida. And I mean, he was a Dave Ramsey disciple. I mean, he ate that stuff up so much, loved it, talking about compound interest, all these things. And I started bringing it home. And that is when the conversation started. And I remember the first book that I was given was Killing Sacred Cows by Gary. I would bring these things home to my parents, and my dad would be like, "Well, it's not technically how it works," or he'd start asking me questions, or kind of. He wasn't necessarily asking me questions at that time. He was more guiding me and telling me what was up because my younger mind didn't know anything about like earning a paycheck, nothing, right? And so that's where it started. But then that's where the conversations began to grow and how the difference between a producer and a consumer. And like without going too deep into it, there's, the producer paradigm, which is you're in this world to produce more. You are here to give. You are here to add value. You are here to create value because we understand that our human life value is the source and creator of our property value, and income is a byproduct of the value that we create. Where consumers are more, let me, push off the responsibility. Let me just take. That's all I'm here for is to buy, consume, take, not necessarily create, grow, add.
A lot of what I saw growing up was really just watching my dad as an example as a business owner and everything else, and as far as like how he operated. And he was an honorable man who loved his family, loved the Lord, everything like that. But he didn't really teach me much about money. It was later on in life at 35 that I really started understanding what money was really about. And ironically, my first introduction to personal finance, just in general, was Dave Ramsey as well. Going through Financial Peace and following that for a while, thinking that, man, I'm rocking and rolling, like I'm doing better than everybody else, and all that stuff. And what I realized was even though the concept of getting out of debt is a really good thing, getting away from bad consumer debt and everything like that, what I realized was a lot of the things that I was following, when you really broke down the economics of it, it was very inefficient in the grand scheme of things. Like there was better ways that we could do things. And so it wasn't anything that I learned from my parents, but it was through self-education and being exposed to other tools and resources. And for you, it was Killing Sacred Cows. For me, the very first book, I actually wrote an email about this the other day. The very first book that really started shifting my mindset was Rich Dad Poor Dad. And it was because I was riding along in a vehicle with a successful business owner who was a real estate investor, and Dave Ramsey comes on the radio, and I get excited. I'm like, "Oh, you listen to Dave too? That's awesome!" I'm like, "Man, like if this dude listens to Dave, I'm definitely doing something right." And what he said really surprised me. He said, "Yeah, he's entertaining, but he doesn't really have it all figured out." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he started telling me about good debt and bad debt and how you could leverage good debt to your advantage. And that word leverage just kind of got burned in my brain. And I started just doing some research, like what is leverage? Like what does that really mean? And it took me to Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is a precursor for a lot of people's financial journeys, is Rich Dad Poor Dad, because it just helped me understand that there were different levels of debt, and there was good debt that could put money in your pocket, and bad debt was taking money out of your pocket. Simply, it was what prepared me for reading Becoming Your Own Banker in 2017. Um, and without that experience, going cold turkey from Dave Ramsey to becoming your own banker, I think it would have been really, really difficult.
They
And
just
it's
said
probably
cold turkey
difficult for
like he was a
yeah,
drug addict.
it's probably difficult for a lot of people, I'm sure,
Yeah.
because it is a paradigm shift and it requires a lot of unlearning.
All right, so you guys just dropped some gold there. So Couple things that jumped out at me, and so I want people listening to think about this. There's this principle that if there's 100% related to any topic, typically speaking, 20% are doing it one way, 80% are doing it the other. So Brock touched on producer or consumer. Typically speaking, there are about 20% of the American population that are producing 80% of the value in the world. And they have been taught that, educated that, learned it on their own, passed it to future generations. As Brock alludes to often, and I'm sure he got this from his dad and Garrett and Bob and all kinds of other great mentors, money follows value. So if you are producing 80% of the value in the world, typically speaking, you are at the top percent of income earners. So I'm going to give you another thing that just clicked into my head, just for the listener or the watcher. One of the greatest ways to determine if somebody is really wanting to help you on your journey is to figure out if they are an entertainer or they are an educator. Simple as that. Because an educator will spend time walking beside you and encouraging you and giving you accountability for the goals you want to accomplish once you know what they are. An entertainer will sell you a product and move to the next one. If they don't have ways to educate you, that's entertainment. Now, a little background on me. I was a die-hard Dave Ramsey follower. I taught it at church twice, I think, in my 20s. And it worked for Leah and I, my wife and I. We paid off over $100,000 in debt in like 46 months. So I tell people all the time, it's not that it doesn't work, but if you could do the same thing again and keep a lot more value and keep your maximum potential protected, would you do that? I'm like, absolutely. If I would have been aware of that, but I wasn't ready. And that's okay. That was the path for me in my journey. The cool part in my world is that my parents read Becoming Your Own Banker right after I did because of how close our family is. And this has been a journey that me, my dad, and my mom, and my brother, my in laws, my whole family has started to go on. And so we'll get into it later as far as legacy planning and heritage. But when you have a family that can communicate and grow together in in regard to being producers and value and money following, it opens up a whole nother level of the possibilities and how you can provide value for your kids, because I am not the only one in my house talking about creating value. And I'm going to give you a quick story. Last night, my 12-year-old daughter, soon to be 12 tomorrow, was sitting outside on the back porch with me and my wife with one of her friends. And we were just talking about things. And her friend, who's over here all the time, said, "Hey, Scout, I think her comment was basically, that doesn't bring value to the family because we have adopted the value creation conversation, and how when you bring value to the family, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, this little green thing called money follows it because it was going to take value for me to do it if you didn't do it." And so this has been an ongoing conversation. We'll dive into that more in depth, but let's talk about life lessons, and we talked about life lessons and values, but let's dive a little deeper into the family unit, fathers particularly, and what we can kind of do to create a tradition of how we interact and communicate about money, and the humbling opportunity and responsibility that is. And Brock, maybe touch on things that have really impacted you along the way, because you're still a spring chicken in the grand scheme of age, but you, it really jumps out at me, your dad didn't start having these conversations with you till you were a junior, in the sense of like the level of what we do. So you go from 17 years old to, what are you now, 25, 26, 9 years, 8, 9 years later. That's drinking water out of a fire hydrant in the grand scheme of life. So kind of touch on that real quick.
Yeah, no, I've definitely been blessed by the things that I've been able to do in life. Like and it does come at a cost. Like I didn't have the original or regular college experience or anything. Like I was working, I've been doing the things, but that has given me a life that none of my friends have, right? And so, definitely drinking from a hot fire hose and being blessed by the mentors that are in my life still today. But you know, I my dad is not Warren Buffett, but when you read articles about Warren Buffett, his kids didn't know that he was a billionaire until like their 30s, until they were out of college, because nothing changed. And you know, when I think about like families who talk about money, who don't talk about money, it was just a part of our life. Like we always talked about money, but we weren't always as open about it. But no matter what it was, good times, bad times, we talked about money. I think that was the easiest part of being able to understand the producer paradigm of money is just a tool. It is not good. It is not bad. It is just a tool and it is a holder of value. That's the way that it needs to be looked at. As I began learning more and more about this starting junior year of high school, I started reading these books. That's when I started to shape some things and understanding and learning more and more. And I think one of the things that I was taught in a Bible study once is more was caught than taught. As I reflect on some of these things, as I kind of start to build out some of my own stuff to share with my friends, is as I look back on this, I can remember more things that I caught rather than I was taught. And I hope that as all of my friends and parents, clients come to me about their kids, is I can share these lessons and show them in a way to where they can read it, they can catch it, but they can also learn it at the same time. And, some of the things that I reflect on is there was never a time in my life where we had a conversation that just said, I can't afford that. My parents never really told that to us. But what they always did was, how can I afford it? Right. And so I had really, and I've never really talked about this before, but I had two different paradigms, I think, in my world. My mom, where her family came from, it was always pay attention to the little stuff because it always adds up. How can you produce things on your own? And so where my mom looked a lot more at the little stuff, my dad looked a lot more at the big stuff. Some of the ways that this showed up was like, I still remember, I think it was second grade, but if y'all remember those Nike Shocks shoes that came out. So I wanted the silver, yellow pair and also like a leather jacket. Well, there was a dilemma. Pay for that, or at the same time, I think it was my grandmother. She had a plumbing issue. One of the toilets broke or something like that. So it was either pay for the plumber or pay for the shoes. Those were the two choices. Well, instead of paying for the plumber, my mom figured out how to do it to save the money to be able to buy me what I wanted. So then that's how I looked at my mom. She would always take it under control. She would figure out a way to save it and then buy it. Whereas my dad, he would, okay, well, here's what we want. How do I just produce that? How do I go out and figure out how to make the money to create that? And I think that creates a great paradigm in my own life to say, you should do it both ways, right? You should figure out and pay attention to the little stuff because it adds up and where you can, uh, I should probably cutting costs is probably not the right word, but being able to cut costs and take it on your own to not only learn more, but do more. And when it comes to bigger things, being able to say, okay, well, how do I produce this out in the world? How do I create the value to create the income for this? And never be in a position of saying, I just can't afford this, but in a position of, how can I afford this? And I would also say that when you take that approach of, I can't afford this, how can I afford this? When, as you always say, I can't afford this, you always limit yourself into the dreams of what you have, right? Because if you say, I can't afford it, it's off. Like,
You've
screw,
closed
screw,
that
yeah,
possibility.
screw the goal list, the dream list, the radar, everything. You've shut it off. You can't do it because you just said that you can't do it. Whereas if you can take the approach of, hey, how can I afford this? You're not shutting it off. You just might say, hey, I might not be able to afford it right now, but if I can figure out how to afford it later, well, now it's still on my dream list. It's a goal that I can strive for and go for. And then later on down the road, if I figured out how to produce for it and how I can afford it, I can check it off the list and I can continue to grow in what I'm doing financially, personally, all of it.
So I remember whenever I was introduced to this idea of flipping the script on I can't afford it to how can I afford it? And I've always seen and sort of prided myself on being a problem solver. When I ask myself, how can I afford it? That puts me in my element of creativity and problem solving and everything like that. And like you said, it also it moves us out of scarcity into abundance. Abundance is where we're going to thrive. We're not going to thrive in scarcity. Because when we're in scarcity, we can't really accept anything. We can't accept solutions when we're in scarcity. We've got to be able to move into abundance. But thinking about being a father, what I do, we've talked about this on a previous episode before about what you got to experience, Brock, growing up was not necessarily pressure to get involved in the business or anything like that. And there's a lot of parents who say, "Yeah, I don't want to really pressure my kids into certain things or whatever." There's a lot of conversation about pressuring your kids into religion and whatever it is. There's all kinds of different things that you can push your kids into, but there's a fine line between pressure and influence. And so you've got this one side where there's pressure and there's resistance and everything like that. Where on the other side, you've got influence where you're coming from a place of love. You're coming from a place of really just wanting them to understand and learn by the things that you've learn from your experience and everything like that. And so when you look at pressure versus influence, like we can influence our kids in very positive directions. We can influence our kids through conversations where it's not necessarily pressure to do one thing or another, but being transparent and allowing them to see like how we think about things. Because I would love if I could just go back in time and ask my dad some more questions because there were things that he just didn't talk about with me. And we had a great conversation. I mean, we had a great relationship. We talked about a lot of stuff, but there were certain things that when I lost him in 2012, I just wished I could go back and ask him how he did this, how he did that, how he thought about this, and everything like that. So, as a parent, I think it's really important that we don't really leave our kids with too many questions about who we are, how we think, everything like that. I think it's important, as we were talking about earlier, to pass on our values, pass on our beliefs, and all those things that are important to us.
I love that. So, because this episode is really framed from fatherhood point of view, I'm going to make a couple of bold thoughts and challenges. Fathers, if you are not living your life on purpose for the things that you know are valuable to you, you are leaving a legacy. And those things are what are going to be the thing that your kid thinks is normal, or they will fight tooth and nail to change that legacy because they don't want it to pass to the next generation. So, to Nate's point of view, and his great point of try not to leave any rock unturned by how you live on purpose, and then the conversations to connect those when kids are ready at the right time because they've seen you doing it, they've seen you show up, they've seen you care for the things that matter to your family, they've seen you love their mother in a way that they don't see other families doing it, they've seen you go, how can we find the way to create value for this to happen because it matters to our family. Notice there I said nothing about money. Money's just the thing that's going to follow if we figure out how to produce the thing that we want to pay for. The value, the money will take care of it. So there's a couple of things that really jumped out at me. Nate, you talked about how can I afford? Brock, you talked about it. And let's touch on that real quick. So I've seen a couple of things lately that I've really liked. There are two key themes that we can live on purpose as fathers about that are indicators of what I consider successful people, which are people who are willing to go, where can I grow? Where can I improve? Where can I be challenged? Where can I continue to provide value? If I don't know how can I figure out how? One of those is delayed gratification, which Brock alluded to with, hey, this yes over here of figuring out how to fix this on my own allows this to happen. Or if I say no over here, that's a yes over here. That's always happening. It's like a chain link. It always works together. And the other one is optimism. And optimism is more of, I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, but I know that if I keep really thinking about this and I know it brings value to the family and I know it brings value to my priorities, I'm going to figure out a way to make this happen in a way that still supports or solidifies the things that matter to me the most. So I'll give you guys a real life example, and this is directly from having coaches who've lived more life than you around you. So probably less than 6 months ago, we're talking to Trent, Brock's dad. We meet with him right after this podcast recording every day, and Nate and I both are conversating about our week, our mindset, yada yada yada, and we both said something about not being able to afford in some way, shape, or form. And like any great coach does, because he has permission to challenge our thinking, He says, "Hey, I'm going to push back on your thinking a little bit." And he goes, "How's that helping you accomplish anything?" And this is what really set my mind free. He said, "The thing you just said you couldn't afford, will it bring value to the things that matter to you most? Your faith, your family, your fellowship, your fitness, any of those main categories that we all have running through our life." And it was about Nate this specific time, but it's come up other times too. And we're like, yeah, that's going to bring huge value to those things. So why would we ever say we can't afford it? So we were having the conversation the other day, and it finally hit me like a ton of bricks. My wife has been wanting a pool in our backyard forever. I have justified not having it because I couldn't figure out how to pay for it. So the I can't afford it was in the back of my mind twirling. And when I opened up that new portal and started saying, we want kids to want to hang out at our house. We've got 4 kids under 14. We want them to want to be here all the time. What are the things that bring value to want to have kids want to come hang out? Well, it's our culture. It's how we hang out, how we treat each other. It's the land we have. It's the side by side. It's the pond. It's all those things. But a pool would take it up to another level as far as kids wanting to hang out here, no matter
Yeah,
how
and
bad my dad jokes are. They
she
want to
wasn't
show up.
talking about just going and picking one up at Walmart, was she?
No, 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 no. We're talking about an
Yeah,
oasis in the
full on,
backyard.
yeah, yeah.
So when I finally said this will bring value to our family, how can you and I, as husband and wife, figure out a way to provide value to prioritize? Then the conversation and the pathways and the creativity just started flowing. And in less than 3 months, I figured out how to bring value to pay for it. Now it's not even a question because of how we think. So we have to live on purpose. Brock's point of catching more than being taught. If our kids see our actions and our words match our actions, that becomes a part of the legacy that's a part of their legacy. Where the conflict happens is if I tell everybody they hear me talk to that this is important and that's important, but their eyes see something different, that creates a clash because they're like, that don't add up. The math don't math. So those open conversations are invaluable. And I can tell you with parents that are just retiring from traditional their W-2s that they've worked or their company, the jobs they've worked for 40 something years, because we've been having these conversations for 5, 6, 7 years, there is almost no worry about what's going to happen because it's been living conversations. My mother will tell you, we provided the value that we know we want you to carry on in this world, and your faith, your family, your finance, your fitness, all that. Your brother and you are just going to get everything and it's going to be split and you'll figure it out because we're not worried about you letting that money wreck you. And so when we think about that, guys, what are some ways that we can really help our kids or our clients, Brock, because you got the value of all the things you've learned from your dad that you're implementing now? What are some strategies or some things you've already done to open up those conversations about family values, history, planning, those kind of things?
First is writing it down, figuring out what it is for you at the parent level. Once you understand it and realize it at the parent level, and you've written it down, now you have a starting place of where to go. Because I think one of the things that has really hurt our society and the generations through time is very few families actually sit down and walk their kids through how they think about money. And a lot of times that doesn't happen is because they don't think about money. And so if we can avoid, this is going to sound funny, if we can avoid avoiding the conversation about money, but hit it head on and say, hey, let me actually think about what's going on. Why am I doing this? What's going on? Then that really starts perpetuating a conversation that not only grows yourself, but also your kids and your what they get to take. And then once you understand, one of the things that we talk about a lot is, does your money align with your values? If you don't have any values, how are you going to make any decisions? There's a leadership podcast out there that I like listening to. And in these 2 episodes, they're talking about what it takes to be a great leader in making decisions, because making decisions is the hardest thing and the least equipped most people are at. One of the key components was understanding your values. When you understand your values, making decisions becomes easier and quicker. Does this align with what I want? Yes or no? And there's your answer. Do I do it or do I not do it? And so I think that would be a great starting point for people, is just saying, hey, let's first figure out what our values are. What do we want? How are we actually handling our money? And then when you've written it down, as you've walked through it, as you've walked through it with your spouse and bringing it to somebody else, whether it's your advisor, us, another mentor of yours, then start and begin having those conversations with your family to say, hey, what we're thinking. And it could be instead of them you sitting them down, because I'm gonna be honest, anytime a parent says to a kid, "Hey, let's sit down and talk," the first kid's reaction is, "What did
Yeah.
I do?" even even me today and my brothers,
Yep.
if my
Something's
mom or dad
wrong.
are like, yeah, anytime they're like, "Let's all sit down," where we all look at each other like, what is going on now? And so, just being able to bring up questions of like, if you're purchasing something or you're going through a budget or your income statement or you get a paycheck, walking it through and saying, "Hey, here's what's going on." Because I had a big realization last night at dinner with somebody, and they were asking me, "Hey, I want to get started doing these things. Here's what I'd like to do." And I was like, "Okay, well, first we need to know what's coming in and what's going out." And they're like, "Well, how do I do that?" It's like, "Well, you look at your bank statements." And they're like, "Okay, I can do that." I'm like, "All right, well, how much do you know is coming in every month?" They're like, "Well, it just gets deposited in my bank account." I'm like, "Okay, well, who's the payroll company? Where can I see your pay stubs?" And they're like, "What is a pay stub?" So sitting down, walking through those things, and actually becoming aware of what you have and what's going on and why you're doing it.
I think it's a great reminder. As Garrett has said before, we've got to remember that we are in a bubble, and inside of this bubble, we just assume that everybody sort of knows the things that we know. Just like that conversation, somebody who's been in the workforce doesn't even know what their pay stub is. It's a good reminder that even grown adults who are out there making money and producing and everything like that still don't really know what's going on. So if that's the case, then we've got to look at our kids who we have the most influence on and prepare them so that they don't get in a conversation at a restaurant one day and don't have a clue what their pay stub is. Like, I mean, it's good for them to know just the basics, because just knowing the basics will automatically start to separate them from everybody else. But then you take it another level, you start introducing like family values, as you were kind of talking about earlier, family values being an important part of who we are, so that your name, your last name sort of carries an identity that they can take and carry with them, so that when they think about who they are, they can look back on those values, point back to those things and say, and really it can become a filter for some of the influences that might come their way. When we were talking about pressure and influence earlier, if you're not going to influence your kids, there's a whole lot of other people that are.
Said
So
said another way,
you
Nate.
can, yeah,
Nate said another way. If you don't have a plan or if you don't have a way of which you're going to do something, somebody else is going to sell you theirs.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, So, and I think about some of the conversations I had with my oldest son years and years ago. And as he was getting ready to start college, I told him, I said, because he said something about going and getting a, having a job while he was in college. I was like, dude, I love the idea of you having a job while you're in college. I said, but I'm going to challenge you in thinking, this was his senior year. I'm going to challenge you, instead of thinking about getting a job, figure out how to make some money, understand what the difference between those two is. So he pressed into that and ended up creating a couple little side hustles. And it wasn't anything that I just sat down with him and I said, okay, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it, all that stuff. I just pushed back on his thinking just a little bit. And then he took that and kind of ran with it from that point. But we've got this incredible opportunity, and it's really short lived as parents, because we only have a certain number of days with our kids, a certain number of opportunities to be able to pour into them. If we're not being intentional about those days, about those experiences, about those moments, then we're going to miss out on so much. And really, when you think about your life in general, so relating this to our faith, God is very intentional. He didn't just create the world and go, all right, let me just see what happens. If God has the power to speak everything into existence, then he has the power to be very intentional and how that existence is going to operate. So, if God is very intentional with us, then we've got to understand, as parents, in the role that we've been placed in this world, we've got to be very intentional about our kids.
It'll be I think it could be a whole nother episode, but I'll just share real quick as far as, all the things you just guys said about being intentional. Knowing why you wanna show up, how you wanna show up, and being intentional and refining it along the way. I mean, it's like 90% of the battle is just being intentional with how you show up and knowing why you wanna show up that way. My wife and Lee and I are really having some good conversations lately of reframing our thinking about what happens when our kids reach their senior year. And we are building a framework and conversation around our kids just daily, not like sit down, let me tell you, but just conversations that is really evolving around this idea of what if we teach our kids how value is created in the world at such a genuine level, and they know that they don't have to leave our home at 18, but they know that they know how to create value in a way to they can really handle their responsibilities financially to where they're still living here, or they live on the property somewhere, or they live in one of the apartments we have on the property, and they can get another year, 2 or 3, and let's say they have a business or they're not sure what they wanna do. How do we really map out how to look at it that way? I won't get into too much detail, but when you dive into the word of God in the Bible, there's a strong argument to be made that nowhere in there does it say kick your child out of the house at 18 when they graduate high school. Okay, so if my kid goes to college, do they know why they're going? Do they know how to go in a way that is matching up with the values of the family that they feel good about? So, Brock, you gave me a great idea. I've messed with this thought for a long time, but I think I'm going to finally do it. The word wealth is so vague and can mean so many things because words matter, as Nelson Nash said all the time, and becoming your own banker. So for me, I love acronyms: wealth, wisdom, which can all be tied to Bible verses and things that we think about, empathy, accountability, love, time, and health. I think that's going to start becoming a foundation of, is that go through our filter? Does it give us more time with the things and the people that matter to us the most? Does it improve our health or hurt our health? Are we seeking wisdom through this? Are we being empathetic? Are we being accountable in our actions? And above all else, love. Are we loving people like Christ loves us? And so I think that's going to start becoming, it's going to be framed out. It's going to be on our wall. And we're going to be sure that everybody is in the household is like, oh, I like that. This is what it means to me. I think a lot of times when you have kids, and I saw this as a middle school principal, we sell them short on what they're capable of because we don't give them an opportunity to be capable of more. But a lot of times, if you say, hey, here's how you can show up, show me how you're going to do it. Just run with it, like Nate, you just said about Boomer. They'll amaze us because they got some skill sets in them that we don't have, or they have some of us in them from the things they've seen. So really valuable episode. Dads show up, fathers show up. You heard the impact that Brock's dad and his mom have had in his life, the impact that our parents have had in Nate and I's life. And the reality is if we're not having a plan, somebody else does have a plan for them. And it may not be a plan that you are excited about when they get to be 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. So, guys, you got anything else to tie it off with?
I think that's good.
All right. Remember, you can catch us on cashflowlegends with a Z.com and connect with us there. Send us an email if you want to. Please, if anything comes up in this conversation and you have a thought or comment, just drop it in the comment section. We'll conversate about it. We respond pretty quick. Um, and if it's brought value to you, hit those like buttons and all the things that help the algorithm. But until the next time, we hope you have a blessed day. See you.